Welcome back to the Paid Media Intelligence series. I'm Erica. Today we're covering two platforms that most e-commerce brands either ignore completely or approach with the wrong strategy. And what makes this one interesting is that Reddit and Pinterest sit at very different ends of how people think and behave. So understanding that contrast changes how you approach both. Let's start with Reddit, because I think this is where a lot of brands misread what's actually going on.
That's a good place to start. And before getting into tactics, I usually step back and ask a more fundamental question. What is the emotional and cognitive state of the person when they arrive on the platform? Because that answer shapes everything that follows. How you write, how you target, even how you measure performance.
So if we apply that to Reddit, what are people actually doing there? Because it doesn't feel like a typical social platform.
It isn't, and the difference matters. People come to Reddit in a research and validation mindset. They have a question or they're trying to make a decision and they want to hear from other people who have no incentive to sell them anything, so the intent is closer to investigation than discovery.
Which is why people actively search for Reddit threads before making a decision.
Exactly. You'll often see someone take a product they're considering and add Reddit to the search query because they're trying to get past brand messaging and hear real experiences, and over time that behavior has built a strong trust layer on the platform.
That trust is interesting because it's high, but it's also very conditional.
That's the key detail. The trust exists because the community resists anything that feels promotional, so when something looks like an ad, it gets challenged quickly, and that creates an environment where peer opinion carries a lot of weight, while branded messaging has to earn its place.
So if a brand shows up in the wrong way, the pushback is immediate.
It usually is, and that's part of what makes Reddit commercially valuable, but also risky, because the same openness that creates trust also creates scrutiny, and if you're not prepared for that, the response can work against you.
There's also something happening outside the platform that adds another layer to this, especially with how people discover Reddit content.
Yes, and this part is often overlooked. A significant amount of Reddit consumption actually starts on search engines. People are going through Google to find Reddit discussions, and now with AI-generated search results, Reddit content is being pulled into answers directly, so even if you're not advertising on Reddit, the conversations happening there are shaping how your brand is perceived.
So before running ads, it probably makes sense to understand what's already being said.
Always, because that gives you a clearer picture of how your category and your brand are positioned in that environment, and in many cases, that organic insight is more valuable than any paid research you could run because it reflects unfiltered user sentiment.
So once you understand that context, how should a brand actually approach advertising there?
The starting point is creative, and more specifically, how native it feels. Because Reddit users are very quick to identify anything that looks like it came from a marketing team, so the most effective ads tend to read like posts, they use the same tone, the same language, and they acknowledge the audience's skepticism instead of trying to bypass it.
That explains why highly produced creative sometimes underperforms there.
It happens quite often. Creative that works well on platforms like Meta can feel out of place on Reddit, not because it's bad, but because the polish signals intent too clearly, and once that signal is detected, engagement tends to drop.
There's also the comment section, which changes the dynamic quite a bit compared to other platforms.
It does, because the conversation doesn't stop at the ad, people can respond publicly, and those responses become part of the experience for anyone else who sees the ad. So if the conversation turns negative, it can influence perception very quickly.
So managing that isn't optional, it's part of running the campaign.
Exactly, and the way you respond matters because it needs to feel human and grounded, not defensive or overly polished, and beyond that, the feedback itself is valuable because it tells you how people actually see your product.
When it comes to measurement, this is where a lot of brands seem to lose confidence in Reddit.
That's usually because they're looking at it through a short attribution window, and Reddit doesn't behave that way. It tends to influence decisions over a longer period. Someone might see an ad, read discussions, think about it, and then come back later through another channel to purchase. So if you're only measuring last click, you're missing most of that impact.
So the attribution window needs to reflect that longer journey.
Yes, typically you're looking at a 30 to 60-day window to capture the real contribution, and when you measure it that way, the economics tend to look much stronger, especially given how efficient the platform can be from a cost perspective.
Okay, shifting to Pinterest, because this feels like a completely different kind of environment.
It is, and going back to that same question, the user mindset here is planning and aspiration. People come to Pinterest because they've already decided they want to change something, and they're gathering ideas, products, and references to build that future version.
So instead of researching a decision, they're shaping one.
That's a good way to put it. They're actively curating, not just browsing, and that shows up in the data. A large portion of users are in a buying mindset, which is quite different from what you see on most social platforms.
And they're not searching for brands, they're searching for ideas.
Exactly. Most searches are unbranded, which means discovery happens through relevance rather than recognition. So a brand can enter the consideration set even if the user hasn't heard of it before.
The audience profile also seems quite strong from a purchasing standpoint.
It is, particularly in categories like home, fashion, beauty, and lifestyle, where the combination of intent and purchasing power creates a very favorable environment for certain products.
And the timing of that intent becomes more precise as people move closer to a decision.
Yes, the signals become stronger as they approach purchase, which gives the system useful indicators about when someone is more likely to convert, and that's part of why performance can be strong when everything is aligned.
There's also something different about how content behaves over time on Pinterest.
This is one of the biggest distinctions, because unlike other platforms where content fades quickly, Pinterest operates more like a search engine, so a well-optimized pin can continue driving traffic and conversions long after it's published, which changes how you think about creative investment.
So the value compounds instead of decaying quickly.
Exactly, and that makes the quality of the visual asset even more important, because on Pinterest, the image is not supporting the ad, it is the ad, and in a feed where users are scanning through visuals, the only thing that captures attention is an image that stands out in a meaningful way.
And that attention dynamic is different from other platforms.
It is. Users tend to spend more time engaging with content, but that attention is conditional. If the visual isn't compelling or relevant, it gets ignored very quickly, so the brands that perform well invest heavily in imagery that fits the platform's aesthetic and clearly communicates the use case.
And measurement follows a similar pattern to Reddit in terms of attribution.
Yes, Pinterest also operates on a longer consideration cycle, so if you're measuring it through a short window, you're underestimating its impact, and the right approach is to extend that window and, where possible, validate performance through broader measurement like lift studies.
So across both platforms, the common thread is understanding how people use them before deciding how to advertise.
That's the core idea, because once you understand the role each platform plays in the customer journey, the strategy becomes much clearer, and the brands that get results are usually the ones that adapt to that role instead of forcing a familiar playbook onto a different environment.
Next episode, we're covering TikTok and Snapchat, where the dynamics shift again, and where a lot of brands are still applying the wrong expectations. So if you want to understand how those platforms actually work, make sure you don't miss it.